Bali, ang dumukot sa kanya, mga armadong tao or naka-uniform siya.
পিছনে মানে হাতটা দিয়ে ওদেরটাকে
Yani dan temannya Sony dinyatakan hilang.
He was forcibly disappeared by the state agencies.
Hindi pa rin namin nakikita yung kuya.
এই সরকার ওকে নিয়ে গেছে।
Ako po pala si Lea Rilo. Bali po yung kapatid ko ang winala. Siya po ay 27 or 28 years old na nawala. Barangay ng Longos, Malabon.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Colonel Khalid Mahmood Abbasi. While he was pursuing his studies in the university in a routine manner, he was confronted with a car snatching incident in Rawalpindi on 3rd May 2013.
Perkenalkan, nama saya Hardingga. Saya anak dari Yani Afri, korban penghilangan orang secara paksa.
আসসালামু আলাইকুম, আমি ফারজানা আক্তার। আমার হাজব্যান্ডের নাম মোহাম্মদ পারভেজ হোসেন। 2013 সালের ডিসেম্বরের 2 তারিখ শাহবাগ থেকে গুম হয়।
Noong 1988, kapanahunan ni Corinne Aquino, dinukot siya noong April 17, 1988, noong alas 4.
While he was detained in jail, he was also alleged in another murder case of Mr. Shabazz Bhatti, who was the Minister for Minorities.
Menurut informasi dari nenekku, bapakku ditangkap di Jakarta tanggal 23 April 1997.
ওরা চারজন ছিল। ওরা দুইজনে দেখে যে ডিবি পুলিশ, যে ডিবি কোড পরা ছিল, তো দুইটা মাইক্রোবাস ছিল। দুই মাইক্রোবাসে দুইজন করে দুই গাড়িতে পিছনে মানে হাতটা দিয়ে ওদেরটাকে
Na sa court po siya dinukot. Bali, nandun kami lahat. Nakita mismo namin ang dumukot. Bali, 5 van yun. Bali, ang dumukot sa kanya, mga armadong tao or naka-uniform siya.
Selama 3 harinya, yakni 26 April 1997, Yani dan temannya Sony dinyatakan hilang.
আমি যখন 4টা বাজে আসরে নামাজ পড়ে আমি ফোন দিচ্ছি, তখন দেখি নাম্বারটা বন্ধ। তারপর মাগরিবের পরে আমাকে একটা ফোন আসে, আমার মামা হয়, ওই মামা আমাকে ফোন দিয়ে বলে যে ওরা নাকি অ্যারেস্ট করছে, ডিবি পুলিশ নিয়ে গেছে।
The evidence, the prosecution could not produce the sufficient evidence to connect him with these murder cases, and therefore the ATC was obliged to grant him the bail.
Bali, yung pagdukot sa kanya, ang mga kapatid ko, pati ako, tinutukan po kami na wag daw po kaming makialam. Yung nakita namin sa reaction ng kuya, bali, blanco na. Paano na ang kuya? Paano na siya?
তো তখন আমি প্রেগনেন্ট ছিলাম 4 মাসে, তো আমি তো অসুস্থের জন্য আমি তো কোথাও বেরোতে পারিনি।
Selama mendengar bapakku ditangkap dan dinyatakan hilang, ibuku trauma, ketakutan, dan memilih untuk pindah rumah.
He was not involved in any activity, but unfortunately on the fateful night of 20th June 2015, in front of the Beacon House, Islamabad, he was kidnapped by the state agencies. He was forcibly disappeared by the state agencies.
Kaso, hindi na namin makita. Kaya ang nagawa na lang ng nanay is magpa-blatter.
পরে ওনারা সব জায়গায় যায় ই করছে, কিন্তু তখন ডিবি অফিসে নিয়ে যাওয়ার পরে বলছে যে না, এই নামে কাউকে অ্যারেস্ট করা হয় না, এরকম কোনো এন্ট্রি নাই।
Dan selama hari-hari itu, entah saya, ibu, atau nenekku Mami Tuti benar-benar merasa kehilangan sekali anaknya, Yani Afri.
Tapos, yung may mga tumulong sa kanya na organisasyon na makalapit yung human rights, nalapitan niya that time. Kaso, wala rin nangyari. Sa tagal ng panahon, alos 3 dekada na.
যে বলছে যে এখানে কোনো এই নামে নাই। আমি সেখানে সন্ধ্যা 7টা থেকে নিয়ে রাত 11টা পর্যন্ত এখানে দাঁড়ায় ছিলাম, কিন্তু আমাকে কোনো তথ্য দেয় নাই। বলছে এই নামে।
He filed a habeas corpus writ petition in Islamabad High Court, and the Justice Shaukat Siddiqui, he gave a landmark judgment and he ordered the ISI to produce all three detainees. But unfortunately, my son, my only son, Muhammad Abdullah Umar, he was not returned to the family.
Hindi pa rin namin nakikita yung kuya. Gusto pa namin makita kaso wala na si nanay. Wala na yung nanay namin na hinihintay siya na.
6 দিনের থেকে নিয়ে 12 তারিখ পর্যন্ত আমি ওইখানে প্রতিদিন কোর্টে সকাল 10টা বাজে গেছি, রাত বিকেলে আসতাম, যে বলতাম না যে ডিপি আমার হাজব্যান্ডকে নিয়ে গেছে, আমি যদি অ্যাডভোকেট খুঁজে না পাই এর জন্য আমি দাঁড়ায় থাকতাম। আমার সাথে আরও সব 4 ফ্যামিলি লোক থাকতো, আমরা এখানে দাঁড়ায় থাকতাম প্রতিদিন জেল।
Karena Yani Afri adalah sosok orang yang sangat bertanggung jawab penuh kepada keluarga.
During these 9 years of his illegal detention, we have not been able to make any contact with him. We are totally unaware of his whereabouts, and we are totally clueless about his well-being.
এই পর্যন্ত আমি কোথাও বিচার পাই নাই। বাংলাদেশের মধ্যে জাতিসংঘের কাছে পর্যন্ত আমাদের বিচারটা গেছে। বাংলাদেশ থেকে আমি কোনো আশা করি না যে আমার হাজব্যান্ডকে আমি ফিরে পাবো। এই সরকার ওকে নিয়ে গেছে।
Commission of Inquiry is so powerless, so toothless that it cannot implement its protection orders.
Belum ada tindakan yang jelas dan berani ya dari pemerintah kita, entah itu dari era Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono atau Jokowi sampai hari ini, belum juga ada niat untuk membawa kasus penghilangan orang secara paksa ini ke meja hijau. Padahal dari semua bukti dan rekomendasi yang sudah ada, bahkan ya dari DPR, itu pun juga belum membuat pemerintah atau presiden berani untuk menyelesaikan kasus penghilangan orang secara paksa.
We also request the government to grant compensation to the victim family, and in addition to that, the perpetrators are penalized.
Ngayon, gusto rin namin makamit yung justisya para magkaroon ng ano yung kuya ko. Gusto namin maramdaman na may justisya sa maraming aspeto po ng bagay na tulong or natuto kaming tumayo sa laban.
আমার 2টা বাচ্চা নিয়ে এই পর্যন্ত আমার বাবাও নেই। আপনাদের কাছে শুধু একটাই চাই, আমার স্বামীকে ফিরিয়ে দেন। আর যদি না ফিরিয়ে দেন, কেন আমার স্বামীকে গুম করা হয়েছে, এই বিচারটা আমি শুধু চাই। ওর অন্যায়টা কি?
We have to look at enforced disappearance both as a crime under international law, so there is the criminal aspect, but also as a multiple human rights violation.
When we analyze why human rights violations, including enforced disappearance, happen in the Philippines, let us go back to the analysis of the structure of the Philippine society, wherein the political and economic powers are controlled by a few families. So when in the efforts of preserving the status quo, there will always be resistance from people who desire for a societal change.
Bangladesh has experienced enforced disappearances during its liberation war in 1971, and immediately after the war, when the left-wing activists were demanding a system where economic freedom will be there and economy will grow in a kind of socialistic manner.
Indonesia have 1965 and 1966 massacre. During this dark period, more than 32,000 people disappeared. families were torn apart, and justice remained elusive.
Pakistan is one of those countries which is badly hit by forced disappearances. It's rampant, it's is widespread.
The response of those who control would result to a suppression of their rights to resist.
There are other crimes that are also about power or creating a chilling effect. I would argue that its popularity is because you achieve this and it's effective because there is actually impunity.
We have seen again enforced disappearances in the Chittagong Hill Tracts in 80s and 90s, and enforced disappearances started recently since 2009 under the authoritarian rule.
During the East Timor occupation by Indonesian government in 1975 until 1999, around 18,600 people disappeared.
So it all started after 9/11 when there was an American invasion by NATO forces on Afghanistan and indirectly on Pakistan as well. During the 20 years of war and terror, thousands of people were abducted from their homes, and there were grave human rights violations which were reported.
Enforced disappearances during 1997 and 1998. In these tumultuous years, 23 activists were kidnapped and 13 remain missing. Their voice, silence, echo in our collective memory.
There is also another type of victims of enforced disappearance, especially during the Duterte administration. These are the what the government called drug offenders.
Most of the ethnic movements, political workers, even human rights defenders and social media activists were targeted. Lawyers were targeted. People who were wanted to express their freedom of speech, assembly, and association, they were targeted.
Enforced disappearance is by its own nature very complex. If we look at a criminal angle, a multiplicity of perpetrators. I can't think of a single case of enforced disappearance where the perpetrator is one. It is conceived as a very complex strategy where there are more than one people involved. But it is unique also because it has a multiplicity of victims.
Enforced disappearance is also used to sow terror among people in the communities.
Authoritarian situation has created the whole scenario where law enforcement, where criminal justice system, where the social fabrics and basically the freedom of expression, association and assembly are extremely controlled. That's why people who are having dissenting voices, who have different political philosophies, and who are raising voices against the state repression are getting disappeared.
So these were the motives to instill fear, to control the masses, and to build a narrative which is state-owned narrative, state-used violence, not just on the enforced disappeared within the detention centers, but also on the families of the enforced disappeared.
That the violence and repression of military operation that was happened in Aceh and still happen in Papua currently still give a lot of opportunity for it to happen.
Enforced disappearance creates when you throw a rock into the water and you have a ripple effect. And it was conceived precisely to achieve that result. Enforced disappearance also hits society at large, society as a whole. The very fact of not knowing creates this additional layer of victimhood. And when it comes to human rights violated by the practice, it's also extremely complex because it's not only one human right or the other. It is much broader than that. It's the prohibition of torture, in a way, the right to life, personal freedom, but it can be depending also economic, social, and cultural rights.
And no institution is there to put a stop to that, and no institution is there to provide justice to the victim families.
There were no mechanisms of justice, although there are courts which are working, High Court, Supreme Court, and there's also a commission of inquiry.
Becoming a state party would likely bind Indonesia to ICED provisions, necessitating domestic adoption of those principles, yet many cases remain unresolved, revealing gaps in the commitment to justice.
The enactment of these laws, the Republic Act 10368 and Republic Act 10353, are both results of the struggle of the victims for recognition that there were human rights violations committed during the martial regime and up to the present.
In fact, the Commission of Inquiry has already registered in the last 12 years more than 10,000 cases of enforced disappearance.
Indonesia also have to give a lot of attention to the victims' family, giving their rights and giving their rights to truth and rights to information and the reparation.
There is no reparation, no justice, and no investigation. This issue has come to the knowledge of UN Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances.
Although it is also mandated by this Commission of Inquiry to order compensation and reparation, but they have not given a single penny compensation to any of the families.
So these reparation programs are provided for in these acts as a result of the struggle of the victims and the people as a recognition of their rights to justice, rights to reparation.
If we stick to the reparation part and other similar measures, it's very much common in Asia to have a certain conflation of two concepts that are actually different concepts. That are social or psychosocial assistance and reparation. It doesn't matter if you are, for example, I am a relative of someone who disappeared and I'm very rich, I would still be entitled to psychosocial or assistance. And reparations in particular is when it's acknowledged that I suffered the damage, I can be a millionaire, but I am entitled to receive reparation. I would also argue that they are both obligations. So there is jurisprudence on this, the working group has mentioned, and maybe they do come at a different point in time. I understand that reparation may come later because it actually requires to assess the damage, most likely through a judicial proceeding. So this might take time. Psychosocial assistance is something that comes much earlier, but it does not replace reparation. And it should be as holistic as possible. And I would stress that both psychosocial assistance and reparation are state obligations.
Indonesia also have to empower the civil society and also civil liberties to minimize the enforced disappearances that will happen in the future. Grassroots movement, advocacy group, and communities should play a crucial role. Their mobilization can pressure authorities to act.
And Bangladesh needs to address this very seriously. That crime of enforced disappearances should stop, and activists, alternative voices are asking for that to the international community, basically to the WGID. We see now various center-left, center-right and centrist parties are now campaigning against enforced disappearances.
The phenomenon of enforced disappearance had existed for decades throughout the globe. This practice started as a tool to stifle dissent and criticism by those in political power. It happened under dictatorships and continues under authoritarian democratic societies. In fact, through decades, it had evolved to serve other than political purposes alone, the constant focus of which is to sow fear and create a chilling effect for the general public. Ironically, at this ancient time, the states would have developed their character as duty bearers and protectors of human rights of its citizens. Unfortunately, the supposed duty bearers have continued the practice of enforced disappearance to protect their own interests at the expense of its own people, causing a lifetime of pain and suffering to the thousands of families left to cope with this harsh reality. The state members of the United Nations should abide by the standards set by ratifying the convention and legislating a law criminalizing enforced disappearance. And more importantly, implementing such law that would surface the truth as to the whereabouts of the disappeared, penalize the perpetrators, provide reparation measures to the victim families, and guarantee non-recurrence of such heinous act. Join us and the victim families in this humongous fight to end enforced disappearance. Visit our website and learn more about enforced disappearance cases in Asia. Join our campaign for the protection, not persecution, of human rights defenders. Let the truth of this phenomenon be known to all, so the families can attain truth and justice for those who were forcibly disappeared.